But I thought I'd start by just talking about the importance of being adaptable. If we ever needed a stark reminder of the importance of being adaptable, along comes COVID and gives us a tremendous amount of evidence that being able to roll with the punches and being able to adapt and change as circumstances around you change. Obviously now the entire world is going through that big piece of forced evidence right now. Earlier today, companies were announcing layoffs and furloughs, and just before I came onto this chat, Disney announced that they were eliminating the pay for their chairman and having the salary of their new CEO. Not that either of them will have any trouble getting through this personally, but there's a lot of evidence out there, high, middle, entry level, that being adaptable is probably the most important skill set one can bring to the entertainment business and probably any business from this point moving forward. And that's been the watchword of my career. So I'll just walk you through things that happened to me in my career that got me to this point, and talk more about the failures than I will the successes, simply because, as many smart people have said over the years, you learn significantly more from failures than you do from successes. How, winning is a great feeling, but how you deal with losing or an unsuccessful endeavor is much better predictor of how long and how well you'll be successful in the future. So my journey started by dropping out of college. Not that any of you should necessarily do that. But I dropped out because I went there for the wrong thing, and discovered that far too late in the experience. Dropped out, moved to New York, came here to write and direct. Did that at night and on the weekends, and during the day I worked in nonprofit arts, first in modern dance of all things, which was really awesome for a young person like myself back then, because it was kind of the Wild West. And I had to learn how to market a modern dance company to colleges and universities across the country. And remembering that this is before the internet, there was not email at this point. And so we had to cold call and go to conferences, and learn how to make materials to put out on tabletops at conferences where you had a quarter of a booth to share with 3 other dance companies. From there, I moved into different parts of nonprofit theater, and then went to work doing group sales for Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and Cats and Miss Saigon. Then went to work for an advertising agency that worked in theater and Broadway and live entertainment called Sereno Coin, which still exists today, but has been since bought and sold a couple of times. I then was talking to a friend of mine. We were both assistant account executives at this ad agency, and he was offered a job to become the head of marketing of the New York Shakespeare Festival and the Public Theater. So that's the Public Theater downtown and Shakespeare in the Park, and he turned it down. He didn't want the response. He thought it was too risky, and he didn't think he could do it. And for some reason, I convinced myself I could. And so I basically twisted his arm to get me an interview. And I was 24, 25 at the time, and I really didn't have enough experience for the job in any way, shape, or form. But I convinced the person running the theater, whose name was and still is George C. Wolfe, Tony winner, Oscar nominee, Emmy nominee, living legend. I convinced him that I could do the job. And then I learned how to do the job because I had absolutely no idea. And this went from learning how to do direct mail on a massive scale to helping a great design firm that still exists today, Pentagram, come up with the look and feel for the Public Theater. In the first season, we had a really great mailer and a great ad in the New York Times. And it was a wonderful campaign designed by Pentagram. And what I learned the day that campaign launched was that the phone system couldn't handle more than 2 phone calls at the same time. And so thousands of people, good news is thousands of people were calling in to sign up for subscriptions to the public theater. The bad news is after the first 3 phone calls, the entire phone system went down. And so tens of thousands of dollars worth of marketing was, I wouldn't say wasted, but it didn't go well that first day. And again, this is before the internet. This is before you could log on and sign up for subscriptions online. And so, you know, it was not a great experience. And I cried like a baby that night. But the next day, we got the phone company in, we worked on the system, we got it back up and running. We actually had to route phones through the offices instead of the box office. And the phone calls picked back up. And eventually subscriptions really came in. That next summer, we did The Tempest in Central Park with Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard. And that went really well. We moved that to Broadway. And that was truly successful. The next year, we did a show downtown called Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk. It went very well downtown. And then we moved it to Broadway. And again, we had lots of fits and starts. We thought we had the whole season to ourselves. We thought we were going to win the Tony Award for Best Musical. We thought we had very little competition. And then 3 days after we opened, Rent opened and took all the oxygen out of the space. But we mustered through and we did a lot of grassroots marketing. Bring the Noise, Bring the Funk was a great musical and dance show starring and created by Savion Glover, who's one of the most talented people probably ever. And it was the story of African-American history through tap. And it's a different kind of tap that Savion does than anyone else does. And attracting an African-American audience to Broadway is not necessarily always the easiest thing in the world. It is not a community that has a huge history of going to shows on Broadway. And attracting the mainstream Broadway audience to a show called Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, a tap rap discourse on the staying power of the beat was also not the easiest thing in the world. But we did live shows and we took over the city actually in a very interesting way. There are these things that everybody knows now, which are those wild postings that you put on, construction sites and scaffoldings, but that had never been done before. And we bought every available space and hired a bunch of young kids to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning and put these posters up all around town. And it worked out really well. We didn't win Best Musical because Rent did, but we won Best Choreography, Best Direction, and a whole bunch of other Tony Awards, and the show ran for a very long time. And then I really wanted more opportunity. I wanted to expand my horizons and expand my career. And a couple of people I knew in the industry came to me and asked me to start a business with them, which would be a marketing agency for all the various producers on Broadway. And we started our agency called Forefront with $27,000 in the bank and no clients. And it was hard. I had a brand new baby. I was not making any money. My wife was not working at the time because she had just had a baby. And we were scratching and clawing to make things work. But pitch by pitch by pitch. And I taught myself PowerPoint, which I've since hopefully mastered. And we went out there and we pitched every business that we could get. And we got a lot of business. We got Rent, actually, strangely enough. And then we picked up a show that was planning to go to Broadway later that year called Chicago, which is the revival of the 1975 show by Kander and Ebb. And this is when the internet was really just beginning to kick up. And I talked a television network back then and still a television network today, into doing a live streamed online opening night. And it was the first ever on Broadway. And it went pretty well, except for the fact that in the middle of it, everything went down. And so we had a blank screen after all this marketing for about 5 minutes. And again, I curled into a ball in the fetal position in the corner of the room and thought my career was over. But we got it back up and running thanks to the kind of ingenious work of a lot of folks who were inventing the internet in real time back then. That show went on to be the longest running Broadway revival of all time. And I think the second or third longest running show of all time. It's still running on Broadway. A couple of years later, or actually not that long later, we got Disney as a client, and they were bringing Lion King to Broadway. And there was a lot of disagreement amongst the powers that be at Disney and the ad agencies and a couple of other places about how to market the show. And I went to see it in Minneapolis, where it was trying out of town. And it, if you've ever seen it, it's probably one of the most spectacular pieces of theater ever made. And I wrote this long letter to everybody, basically saying, you're all fucking crazy. Stop worrying. Do not spend a gargantuan amount of money. When this thing opens, you're going to sell all the tickets, and just calm down. And that worked. They listened to me. And then 2 days later, they fired us. So, I got their attention by writing this letter, and then it did not pay off the way I had wanted it to. At that point, the internet was really beginning to take off, and we got a lot of attention for a lot of the stuff we were doing online. And we got a ton of internet clients. This is during the first internet bubble. And we did a lot of work for them and got paid a decent amount of money for it. But almost all of those companies failed because they didn't have real business models. And at the time, my wife, who was our CFO, ran pretty much all of the kind of businessy end of the business, and I ran creative and account services and things like that. And there were companies that were offering us stock in lieu of pay, and I was like, "Oh my God, that sounds awesome! We can own pieces of these companies. These companies are worth millions and millions of dollars." And I was still relatively young at the time. And my wife said to me, "In no way are we taking stock instead of pay. And in fact, we will be paid upfront by everyone." And within a couple of years, almost all those companies went belly up, in part because, we spent a lot of their money, but also in part because none of them had great business plans. And we got paid. And people who took stock really got hurt badly. We also started during this time to get a lot of television clients. Including Court TV and HBO. We did this nationwide tour for HBO where we screened movies outside. And now they have these inflatable screens that you can put up in a half an hour. But back then that didn't exist. And so we would build this huge trellis on site on the top of the steps of the Art Museum. Shout out to Philly. On the beach in Santa Monica, at the State Fair in Minneapolis. And if it got really windy, we had to take the screen down very fast because it was basically a huge sail. And we did a lot of great work. It got a lot of attention for it, a lot of news. And then HBO decided that they didn't want to pay us. And we were out of pocket because the client, my client there, got fired. They had not really necessarily approved everything that she had said we could spend. And it became a real tumultuous conversation between us and our client, to the point where, we had spent, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on these events, and we were out of pocket, which is an important lesson to learn. Always get paid up front. But then secondarily, it's hard to tell your client, they're wrong. But we basically said, look, we're going to stop doing the work unless you pay us. And it became, a game of professional chicken. We got paid basically about 40 cents on the dollar for what we were owed. And it was a really hard lesson to learn. And then the following summer, I noticed that a lot of our retainer clients were kind of pulling out, and the money was just not free flowing as much as it had been up until that point. And I went to my business partners and I said, we're going to have to cut back on staff and we're going to have to close the LA office. And they didn't necessarily see it the way I did. And so we agreed to part ways. I sold my part of the business to them. And then I went to work for one of our clients, which at the time was called Core TV. They've since turned into True TV. And a week after I started and a week after I sold, 9/11 happened. And 9/11 was a catalyst that kind of made the recession in 2001 happen, but it had already been creeping up until that point. And, you know, I basically got the last good job in the entertainment industry. And so it was a lesson in learning how to read the tea leaves when bad things are beginning to happen, and or a lesson on, you know, how to be nice to certain people when it's important to, so that they are loyal to you, you know, when you need them. But it also was a great lesson in how to, you know, basically embed yourself in a business in a real hurry. You know, we closed down the offices the day of 9/11 and all walked home. And then I came back in the next day and we all sat around and just kind of held hands and cried and talked. You know, I became a part of that business really quickly, despite the fact that I was brand new and really hadn't worked for a big company like that ever before. And it really galvanized people behind the ideas I was able to bring to the table. We transformed Core TV from a trials at night network into a forensic and crime solving network, and ratings went through the roof. And again, I wanted more opportunities. And so I applied for a job at AMC Networks, which was at the time called Rainbow Media. And I took a job as the head of marketing for IFC, and went in there, and someone at the time gave me a book called The First 90 Days, which I think is one of the most important books I've ever read. I still recommend it to people. The first sentence of the book is 50% of executives who make major transitions fail. And the second sentence, it was, or still is, the reason most executives fail in major transitions is misdiagnosis. They come in and they say, I know what's wrong here. And they just start changing things. And in reality, things might not be wrong. You just may be new. There may be things that are right that haven't been tried, or there may be things that are right and you need to keep them. And the first lesson that the book gives you is to sit down with every major stakeholder you can find and ask them the same 5 questions. Doesn't really matter what those questions are, just ask them the same 5 questions in the same order, and it will give you a diagnosis for what is actually going on at this company. The third lesson it gave you was to then take that diagnosis and create a set of clear agreements between you and whoever happens to be your boss, whether it's the board or the CEO or your manager. You know, this is what I think is going on based on the evidence that I've gathered, and this is what I plan to do about it. Okay. And the thing I learned there that I think I've always kept with me since then is that your relationship with your manager or your boss is your responsibility. It's not their responsibility. We all love to complain about our bosses, no matter who they are. I'm sure plenty of employees of mine have complained about me. And at the end of the day, you're the one working for the other person. And so if you don't ask the questions, or you don't bring up things that are important, or you don't speak truth to power, there's really nothing they can do with the problems that you're having. One can only fix something they're aware of. That was a really important lesson to learn. And that credibility I built, both first at Core TV and then at IFC, was the currency that enabled me to get things done. I could have been just as right about the things that I thought about these businesses. But if I hadn't gotten clear agreements, if I hadn't gotten buy-in from the people who I work with, and I hadn't gotten buy-in from my bosses, I probably wouldn't have gotten the things done that I was able to get done. We rebranded IFC from a small independent film channel in about 27 million homes into a comedy channel in 80 million homes within about 6 years. I was given the opportunity to lead the acquisition of Sundance Channel and then run both channels. And I still point back to the clear agreements I continually made with my bosses, but also something else that was really important that I learned in that same book, which is leadership without authority. We're often asked to work across a matrix in companies and in organizations. We're often asked to lead projects where we have to solicit the buy-in of people that do not work with us or even in our department. We're often asked to create partnerships outside our organizations with people who you have zero authority over, and oftentimes are kind of in reverse. They have authority over you. To get great buy-in, you have to figure out a way to lead without necessarily telling something you need to do this, telling someone you need to do this. Pointing the finger and saying you need to do this because I said so is quite possibly the least credible way to get something done. And I learned that in great droves working at AMC Networks. And it was a great place to work, but during the time that I worked there, we went public, and then we went private, and then we went public again. And there was, a lot of leadership issues. My boss's boss's boss was Jim Dolan. Anybody know who Jim Dolan is? He owns the Knicks. And if you know anything about the Knicks, Jim Dolan is a little bit of a kook. And so he was not an easy person to work 2 levels down from, because it was very whim-based. It was pretty much whatever he felt when he woke up that day. And so, we had a lot of fits and starts and pendulum swings and mood swings, and it was not always easy. But because the people who worked around me became very, very loyal to me, and because my bosses were also super loyal to me, I was able to get things done and was able to kind of stay, relatively safe within a kind of tumultuous ecosystem. And then I went to my bosses and I said, look, Sundance Channel is an interesting project, but I don't think that long-term the channel itself necessarily is a viable thing. I think the business is changing. This is in 2007/8/9, just when Netflix was beginning to stream. On the IFC side of the business, Netflix came to me and said, we'd like to buy up all your programming and buy the streaming rights for it. And I went to my bosses and I said, great, we're going to get paid 7 figures for the streaming rights for Portlandia and a couple of other shows. And they're like, the what rights? And it was a big argument internally. And that led to a conversation where I told my bosses I thought that Sundance Channel should actually turn into an OTT pure play streaming service. And they kind of dug the idea, but I got into a huge series of arguments with the legal folks internally at the company at that time, who said we did not have the rights to do that with the content that the network had. And we completely disagreed. And we disagreed on many different things, not me and my bosses, who stayed pretty agnostic, but me and kind of the internal machine at AMC Networks at the time. And so I decided to look for other opportunities. And Jeff Skoll, who's a billionaire from eBay, and I struck up a friendship, and he offered me a job to go there and start a television division for them. That was an interesting set of circumstances. Jeff owns the company. The CEO at the time was not an honest person. And so I had to kind of work around that person to talk to Jeff on an ongoing basis. And it wound up being a really tumultuous time. Very successful in certain aspects. We won an Emmy for a show called Hit Record that we made with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. We did a lot of great creative work. I got a lot of attention in the industry. It was a network that was built, and a streaming service that was built for millennials. And so that was the time when I really started studying the millennial generation and became a bit of an expert in it, which I now get paid to lecture on ad nauseum. But it was a miserable time in my job, in my professional career, because my boss and I were basically at war the entire time. And it became an internal struggle over popularity inside the business. Luckily, he was just a terrible person who no one liked. And I became popular, but which made him angrier. And here's a great lesson. I negotiated a really great contract when I went there. And when Jeff Skoll went away on his honeymoon, my immediate boss fired me, which triggered a sizable payment from the company, which made Jeff very angry later on. And then that person subsequently was let go. But I walked away with a nice nest egg. And then ultimately was lucky enough to land a really great job at NBC, heading digital enterprises there. And I got paid twice that year. One of the reasons why I'm able to weather this current storm is because I've negotiated really good contracts for myself on the way in. And something I say to young people all the time is if you don't ask for it, there's absolutely no way you're going to get it. And, you know, negotiating hard on the way in, no one's going to take the job away from you because you ask for things. How you react when you don't get them, that could lose you the job. But understanding that being a good advocate for yourself is the only way you're going to get compensated commensurate with what you're worth. Asking for things and responsibilities, even if you're not 100% sure how to do every aspect of them, these are the things that truly successful people do. The current CEO of Disney has never run a television division. He comes from the theme park division and consumer products before that. You know, many people you now see in great areas of responsibility are doing many of the things that they're doing for the first time in their lives. And frankly, you know, William Goldman, who wrote Princess Bride and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, his great book called Adventures in the Screen Trade. And the first line is, the thing you need to know about the entertainment business is nobody knows anything. And the thing you need to know about the entertainment industry is nobody knows anything. And if all you have to do is look around you at the current landscape in the media and entertainment business, and it's just very true. That's not a bad thing. Not knowing how to deal with the internet when it's a brand new thing, not knowing how to deal with COVID, like who could know? But being able to adapt to those circumstances and learn on the fly and surround yourself with really good people and learn from them and try things and fail fast and move on. You know, that's how you overcome not knowing everything. And in fact, another great book called Good to Great. A lot of the information in it is a little stale, but the major lessons are still really important. You know, wake up stupid every day. Wake up ready to learn something new every single day. And if you do that, you can overcome not knowing anything. So I went to NBC. Again, I negotiated really hard on the way in, you know, plan for the divorce while you're picking out the wedding rings. Not necessarily for romantic relationships. That is a work-only piece of advice. I've been married 27, almost 28 years and did not plan for the divorce at any step. The deal there was they said, we want to start a streaming service and we're prepared to spend, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars starting this streaming service. And I said, great. We again did my first 90 days exercise, and then we did 11,000 interviews of consumers of streaming content, and we built CISO, this really great comedy streaming service that made tremendous content with Dan Harmon, a show called Harmon Quest, Take My Wife, a really great show with Cameron Esposito and Rhea Butcher, Shrink, a great show with Tim Baltz and Ted Tremper. And the failure was I agreed to use the Comcast tech stack, which didn't work out all that well. And I really tried to manage the product end of the business with too few human beings on staff. You know, Netflix has 5,000 engineers, Hulu probably has 2,000 engineers, Amazon probably has 10,000 engineers. And we tried to do it with a staff of 35, 40 people. And the tech really just did not work very well, which basically eliminated our ability to capture subscribers in the first 30 days. But we pivoted, we made a deal with Amazon. We did pretty well. We got to about 250,000 subscribers by the end, but NBC lost their nerve, pulled the plug. And again, I had to leave. But because, again, I was able to negotiate a really good deal for myself on the way in, I had a nest egg and I started a production company called eShap TV, self-named, and made a show called Funny Women of a Certain Age. First special aired on Showtime last March. The second special just aired a couple weeks ago on Showtime. Sold project to Disney streaming. Was able to buy into a podcast company called Forever Dog. Because of that relationship, I optioned a ton of different content in podcast form. And I'll get to how that paid off in a second. And it was going pretty well, but I realized that, having a bigger brand name in today's ecosystem was going to be really, really important. And at that time, a friend introduced me to the investors in National Lampoon. We struck up a series of conversations, and they acqui-hired me. They bought my slate, they bought my company, they brought me in as president. Since then, one of the podcasts we optioned, called Let's Go Atsko, we sold to Quibi. We just sold another show to Comedy Central. We have a lot of live shows that we had to cancel in March. I actually planned a huge 50th anniversary, you can read about it on Deadline, series of live events and performances all around the country, including South by Southwest and at Joe's Pub at the Public, where I started, for March. And then COVID hit. And we had to cancel all those live performances. We lost a shit ton of money. And now I'm running the business. It's going pretty well, but I'm not going to lie. We've really had to kind of retrench since the crisis hit a number of weeks ago. And it's going to be an interesting year for the entire industry. What I learned then was, again, be adaptable. We did our first live streaming comedy show last Friday. We have another live stream comedy show tomorrow night, Quarantine Live. It'll be streamed to YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. We're actually going to start recording podcasts using Zoom coming up and distributing them. We just released a pilot that we made on our YouTube channel today called Max Riddle, a great show that you should really watch if you can. And through all of this, I was able to learn a number of things that I think are important lessons. The thing that's going to be the longevity of your career is being yourself. And I know that sounds kind of Pollyannish to a certain extent, but literally the only thing that you can do better than everyone else on the face of the planet is be you. Now, what that is hard to determine. It isn't just like, hey, show up and just, wear the clothes I want to wear and tell the jokes I want to tell. It means understanding what your talents are, the things that come naturally to you. It's understanding, and being self-aware about what other people think about you and your reputation. It's having constant feedback from people you trust. It's laying out a plan for yourself to discover the things that you're great at and that you can continue to improve at until you become the best in the world at them. There are a lot of great books to do this. I really love StrengthsFinder as one of the ways to kind of help you suss out the things that you're really good at. I think one of the long lessons that hard lessons that people are going to learn right now is that very few people go to the great beyond wishing they had spoken their mind less. Doesn't mean you can give a license to be an asshole to people, but speaking truth to power and saying things that you believe are true and sticking to those things despite the marketplace, it may not always be easy. In fact, I can tell you it's often very hard. But at the same time, the great regrets most people have are having not taken the chances that they were meant to take. You got to give yourself the weapons and the tools to take those chances smartly. Self-awareness, feedback, a network of people you trust. I'm repeating myself, but there's repeating. An action plan for the next 90 days, the next 120 days, the next 2 years, the next 3 years. You can always change your action plan. You can always change the things that you think are important, but not having the plan is your first big mistake. So those are the things I've learned. That's where I've been. I'm happy to open it up to questions and go on. Dolly, I don't know if I've covered everything I should have covered, or if that's what I should have said, but you know, all rules are off anyway, so.
No, Evan, thank you very much. I've known you for a very long time, and I learned a ton. So we can absolutely open it up if you want to write a question in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself and jump in. Let's take advantage of Evan while we have him right here. If you guys want to hang on for another 10 minutes or so, we are happy to do that for you. So would anybody like to chime in?
Hi, yeah, I'm Brittany. Nice to meet you. Thank you for all this helpful information today. I think something that might be on the top of people's minds right now in the midst of COVID-19 is how the market is changing as far as job availability. So trying to adapt to the possibility, like I'm a graduating senior, like I'll be graduating in May, and just thinking about talking to other students who are concerned about the entertainment and marketing industry, adapting to this and going out into the workforce and trying to get hired at places where there might be hiring freezes. Any advice for people trying to enter the job force pretty much, and doing the whole job search thing, especially in this kind of climate, is that if adaptability is the word of the day, that's what I need for this season for sure, is being able to adapt. So any thoughts on that?
Question, and I get a lot of that. I don't want to hit mute. I get a lot of these questions because I teach at NYU, and I have a lot of graduating seniors. Yeah, it's tough. The first thing I would say is watch where the money is going. So I had a great call today with a potential partner called BetterHelp, which is a therapy app, and there's one called Headspace and Talkspace. And there's a lot of money moving towards those things right now. Amazon just announced that they're doing a tremendous amount of hiring. I don't know how much of it's in the entertainment business. So, one of the first things I can give you is, read. The ability to watch companies cut back on retainers in 2001 was the thing that told me I needed to get out of my agency. And so if you can read the tea leaves, and there's a tremendous number of great newsletters out there, MediaStar, to my mind, being the best one because it's an aggregator of a lot of things, you can watch where the money is going. And I would swim towards those, towards those rafts in the water. The second thing is, now's a really good time to reach out to people on LinkedIn or elsewhere, and ask for an informational conversation. Not a job, an informational conversation. Because right now, no, a lot of the companies are not hiring, but a lot of the key executives and middle-level executives have some time on their hand. And so being able to, get in their mindset now, while they're not hiring, but are, sitting around, in their PJs drinking coffee, it's not a terrible idea. Also, I know this is not the easiest thing to say, but right now offering your services for free to somebody. Can I do coverage for you? Can I run your, if you need help and you cut back on staff, do you need help running your calendar now? Offering free help right now may not feel great, but certainly, be the mouse that pulls the thorn out of the lion's paw now, and you will be grateful for having had that relationship moving forward. To me, the two biggest things you can do is reach out. Spend an hour every day hunting down people whose emails you can get, or whose names you can get from some other people, as opposed to kind of job portals, which are probably pairing back and pairing back and pairing back, and being adventurous enough to say, can I buy you a virtual cup of coffee? Can I have an informational with you? Do you need help? I'm willing to work for free. You know, that's not a bad set of things to say. But those of you who follow me on LinkedIn will know I really hate blind marketing reach out, especially right now. So be very empathetic. Write the email as if you're reading it. Start with, I hope you're safe. So that's a bunch of advice I can give on the job hunt right now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I like what you said about asking for more. Like, if you're not going to ask, then nobody's going to give it to you. And I guess I'm kind of still struggling with it. I'm willing to fight for other people all the time, and Lucy actually knows that, and she's been on a really long phone call with me last week about it. But I don't know how to get myself out there and actually ask for me for something. Do you have any advice to like get yourself out of that comfort zone of just being, you know? Yeah,
I can. Well, first of all, and this may sound sexist, so I apologize in advance, but being the father of 2 women in their 20s and teaching a lot of young women at NYU, what I have found is, for 10 years I've been teaching at NYU, is that we train our young women to apologize and not ask and advocate for themselves, and we treat our young men to kick down doors and do shit they've never done before. And we have to you have to understand how much of that is just society's ingrained lessons we teach, and try to figure out, picture that thing as a monster who you have to shove off a cliff. So visualization, I find often helps. And then the second part of that would be writing down the things you want to ask for and rehearsing them over and over again, not just in a mirror, but you just made one of the great points, which is you have someone you can talk to in Lucy to go to for advice. Do not limit yourself to your professors and your friends. Open up your network to a series of advisors you can go to on an ongoing basis. If there's someone in the industry whose career that you admire, and in your case, I would very much advocate it being a woman, go to them and ask them for how they did it. Because all humans are 99.99% the same set of materials. You and a woman who is 5, 10, 15 years ahead of you in the industry are 99.99999% the same being. And so if there's lessons you can learn from them, if there are stories they can share with you about doing that, those are the things to emulate. You know, when you watch a good batter swing, you want to emulate their swing. When you see someone kicking down doors and advocating for themselves, a lot of the things they do, even if they don't feel comfortable hanging on you, are still probably pretty useful. You know, there are lessons to be learned.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Who's the other guy?
Oh, yeah, it's me, Lawrence. So you talk a lot about, I guess, learning from books that have great lessons, experiences, and I guess reaching out to other people. But like, where does school factor in learning for the real world, preparing for the real world?
I mean, I think it depends on what school you go to and who your professors are, frankly. So I think choosing your classes is really important. You know, the other thing that I think a lot of people do not take advantage of, or at least in my experience, or do it enough, are the clubs and the societies that schools offer. You know, those clubs, those societies, those radio stations, which are now podcasting networks, they tend to be good microcosms of how the world actually works. You know, I do a thing where I split my class into groups of into 6 groups, and I force them to do a final project together, and I purposely populate it with people from different parts of the university who don't share the same major, so that they can learn to lead without authority and get to know parts of the business that they don't know. force yourself out of your college into an environment where you're colliding with people from other disciplines. If you're a business student, work with film students. If you're a film student, work with business students. If you're a film or a business student, work with marketing students. Force yourself into many versions of what you're going to experience when you leave. The book learning is really important. There are lots of case studies to take a lot of lessons from. I love case studies, but the best advantage I think pretty much any university in America gives you is the ability to submerge yourself in a microcosm of what you're going to experience in 3 or 4 years when you're out in the real world. Sticking just within your major is the worst way to go through college. It is a great way to come out with a singular focus and a lack of, frankly, awareness of how the world works. So to me, that would be my chief lesson is cross-pollinate. Be an intellectual tourist. And as far as books go, Strength Finders 2.0, You Are Not a Gadget, which was written by Jaron Lanier, which is about avoiding digital lock-ins. Mavericks at Work, 0 to 1, as much as Peter Thiel makes me gag. It's a really good book. The First 90 Days, Freakonomics, Nudge. These are all really good books to take case studies from. And then there's a really great podcast called Startup Podcast, which the first season in particular I find very, very useful. Now's a great time to catch up on podcasts. Reply All, another really great podcast about technology and media. The Theory of Everything, which is a really fascinating and weird podcast. Those are all really, really good things to consume for lessons.
Thank you.
Sure.
So in like the beginning of your talk, I was saying how you worked a lot in theater and then you transferred that over into like larger entertainment companies. So I mean, I'm a little like later into my college career and like just figuring out, like I was originally like architecture and now I'm like, I want to, get into entertainment. So I work in theater now, like I'm a stage manager.
Oh, wow.
And like eventually want to transfer over to television. So you kind of went like in and out. I think it was just the Wi-Fi or whatever. But I kind of wanted to ask you how you kind of navigated going from like theater into like larger entertainment, like television and stuff like that.
That was hard. That was really hard because I tried to do it for a very long period of time. And if I hadn't started my own agency, it wouldn't have worked. And it was rebranding myself as a marketing guru that really enabled me to make that leap. And then I got clients who were in the industry that I wanted to work in, and then one of my clients offered me a job. That said, I think the transferability of theater into other media now is substantially tighter than it was when I was, that was almost literally 100 years ago. And so, people, Kenneth Lonergan and all these people are making leaps back and forth from theater into kind of more electronic versions of entertainment. But I think the best way to do this is something Quentin Tarantino says, just make shit. You're a stage manager. Every skill you need to succeed in the entertainment industry, you already have. Because a stage manager is a problem solver. That is what they are. That is the basic nature of the job. And so, aligning yourself with screenwriters or directors who want to make content in that vein, basically the difference between a stage manager and a line producer is a couple of letters. Like they are the same gig. And so whether it's a podcast or start a streaming show and build a body of work, having things to point to, that say I can do this. That is usually the best predictor of whether or not you can convince somebody that you can do that. So I would, especially right now, go out to friends and family and there's a great program called StreamYard that we're using to do our live streaming shows. It's a great live television production platform that you do not have to know anything about editing or anything else in order to use. I highly recommend it. And just start making stuff. It goes back to that kind of cultural interloping or intellectual tourism that I talked about. Align yourself with people who have the skill sets that work in the industry that you want to work in, and start working with them. I'm sure. Where do you go to school?
St. John's.
Okay, I'm sure either within your social circle or your academic circle, there are people who do the things you want. Create that alliance now. When you look at pretty much everyone successful in the entertainment industry, almost all of them can point back to some kind of gang that they were in early on in their career that they still continue to work with later in life, whether that's Amy Poehler or John Mulaney or Lorne Michaels or Jamie Tarsus. Like they all still kind of pollinate or cross-pollinate with the folks that they started in the mailroom with or in college with. That gang you associate with, it's a great way to protect yourself from the dangers of the world.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anyone else? I think we are at the end of our session. Evan, thank you again so much. And for everyone who was with us today, thank you for your support of what we're trying to do. We're going to keep doing this every month. And so I'll be sending out an email to let you know what's going on. But thanks to Evan. Thanks to you, everybody. Be safe. Stay home. And we are looking forward to seeing you in person in November, God willing. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.